Webster defines crunch time as a critical moment or period, like the end of a game, when decisive action is needed. Every sports fan knows this time in the game. Your palms sweat just a little more, your heart races just a little bit faster, and you live and die with every play until the final seconds tick off the clock and you're either celebrating a victory or disappointed by the defeat. The team at Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network understands just how critical these moments are. For us, it begins as soon as the next set of games are on the board. We evaluate the opening lines and any breaking news throughout the week. We cover each game inside and out, whether it's from inside the locker room to a huddle down on the field, the court, or the ice. We take you inside the meeting room with scouts, coaches, and executives. We have our fingers on the pulse of all the sports that we cover: the National Hockey League, NBA, college basketball, college football, and the National Football League. We are the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network, and we're here to help you find your sports advantage. After all the data has been crunched, we then turn it over to Kenneth for the best analysis around. His unique perspective in both understanding the data and how it applies to the game and how you win is the Crunch Time Sports Advantage. Are you ready? The Crunch Time Jet is fueled and ready for takeoff, and the Crunch Time Express is about to leave the station. Your VIP pass has been approved, so all aboard.
Good evening, everyone. This is Jessica, and I will be joined momentarily by our senior analyst, Kenneth. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube. You can also follow us on Twitter at CrunchTimeVIP. Welcome to the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network's Top 25 rankings, where we take a different approach to evaluating the best teams in college football. Unlike traditional polls, our rankings are fluid and adapt each week based on the most current data. We assess every key aspect of a team's performance, going beyond just wins and losses. We start by looking at power rankings and strength of schedule, not just for the games already played, but also for the tough matchups looming ahead. Then, we break down each team across all three phases of the game: offense, defense, and special teams. For special teams, we dig deep into the kicking game, analyzing field goals, punting, and even the impact of kickoff and punt returns. These often overlooked plays can change the course of a game, and we make sure they get the attention they deserve. On offense and defense, it's not just about how many points are scored or allowed, we focus on how effective, efficient, and explosive a team is. We evaluate their ability to move the ball, make critical stops, and create big plays. Whether it's marching down the field with precision or generating game-changing defensive stands, we look at the numbers that truly matter. This isn't just another top 25 list. It's a comprehensive, data-driven analysis that reflects the complexities and nuances of college football. So, buckle up as we dive into this week's rankings and break down the teams that are making waves.
And fantastic job, both Jennifer and Jessica, as always, each and every week, really kind of setting the stage for us to get into these breakdowns. And when we look at what we saw Rivalry weekend, besides some of the just complete foolishness that coaches are allowing their teams to put on display. But as far as the games themselves go, there are really only 3 games that will impact this week's rankings. And we're going to start in South Carolina, as the Gamecocks were able to get a big-time win against in-state rival Clemson. Really going to be problematic for the Atlantic Coast Conference with that result. Another result that was absolutely problematic for the ACC is Miami going up to the former Carrier Dome, losing to Syracuse. Said that might be a problem spot for the Hurricanes in that matchup. Absolutely was. Give Fran Brown, the head coach of Syracuse, a lot of credit. He's probably your ACC coach of the year just because of the job that he's done in his first year as a head coach. And then the final game, and it was the shock heard around the world, literally, with Ohio State losing at home again to the Michigan Wolverines. 4 straight losses in that rivalry. This is going to be very problematic for seeding purposes for the Buckeyes. Buckeyes are out as far as the Big Ten championship game goes. In goes Penn State in that matchup against Oregon. We'll see where the Buckeyes end up ranked as far as our rankings this week and what we're going to project from the committee later on Tuesday night. So let's jump quickly into what we had last weekend. And again, if you're watching this on YouTube or streaming this on Twitter, I want to say thank you for doing so. Let's run through these really quickly. So we're going to start with number 25 and we're going to work our way to number 1. Coming in at number 25, Memphis. 24, Kansas State. 23, Texas A&M last week. 22, Louisiana Raging Cajuns. South Carolina, followed by Ole Miss, UNLV, Tulane, Alabama, Clemson, and Iowa State. As we get deeper into the top 25 from last week, coming in at number 15, Army, followed by BYU, Arizona State, Boise State, Indiana, Tennessee, SMU, Notre Dame, Miami, Penn State, Texas, Ohio State was at 3, Georgia at 2, Oregon at 1. Folks, we got a fresh set of rankings hot off the press. Let's get into it because there was some absolute rocket launchers as far as how our numbers shake out this week. So coming in at number 25 is the Tulane Green Wave, off of a major disappointment there against Memphis, dropping their record to 9-3 overall. Now, they did lock up a bid to face off against Army for the conference championship that will be coming up this Friday at 7 p.m. But as far as the American Conference, no chance of getting one of those automatic bids as one of the top 5 conferences, both with Army having their weak strength of schedule. We'll talk about them here in a minute. And then Tulane with their 3rd loss. Checking in at number 24, Coach Prime and the Colorado Buffaloes. Colorado sits there with a 9-3 record, loses out on the tiebreaker as far as getting into the Big 12 championship. Needed a little help from their friends last night. Did not get that as Houston was not able to knock off BYU. So Coach Prime will have to settle for a 9-3 season, which when you think about where this team was 2 years ago, maybe the worst power ranked team in all of college football, for them to now be 9-3, a huge successful season there for Coach Prime and Colorado. Checking in at number 23, also 9-3 out of the Southeastern Conference, is the Missouri Tigers. Very solid game from Missouri last weekend, or I should say this past weekend, beating Arkansas 28-21. That's going to lock them in probably to where they're going to finish the season at, somewhere in that low 20s for the committee, also for us. Checking in at number 22 off of a heartbreaking loss at home versus South Carolina, that is the Clemson Tigers. Now, Clemson backdoor their way into the Atlantic Coast Conference Championship game, still have an opportunity to make the college football playoffs by winning their conference, but that is the only path for Clemson to get in. Major drop from where they were last week to where they are this week. Checking in at number 21, we just talked about it, off of that win against Tulane there in New Orleans, 34-24 on Thanksgiving night. Big win for the Memphis Tigers. Not so much so if you are the conference commissioner for the American Conference, as you were holding out hope of maybe getting a bid into the college football playoffs. Think you're going to be left out this year as a conference, but Coach Satterfield, fantastic job there. Coaching in Memphis, doing a great job. Checking in at number 20, and this has been a team that we've been high on extremely over the past few weeks, and that is the Raging Cajuns of Louisiana out of the Sun Belt. They are also with a 10-2 record like Memphis. And looking at Louisiana, they have an opportunity to win their conference championship on Saturday as they will be squaring off against Marshall. We'll be hopefully breaking that game down on the big show on championship week, the championship week edition of the big show. So fantastic job there by Louisiana. They'll finished the regular season for us ranked number 20. Coming in at number 19, and that is the UNLV Running Rebels. And UNLV just set up a big-time rematch there with Boise State. We know that they dropped that game at home against Boise early in the season. They're looking to kind of knock Boise out of the playoff berth and maybe get a chance to backdoor their way in. So fantastic job once again by UNLV getting that big time win this weekend over Nevada, 38-14, setting themselves up in very prime position to maybe earn their way into the college football playoffs. Coming off their win in the Egg Bowl, and that is the Ole Miss Rebels. And always a quick hello to all of my friends there with the Rebel Walk. They do a fantastic job of covering Ole Miss sports each and every week. Also want to say a quick hello to Miss Patty, Miss Donna, Miss Kathy, Miss Ashley. Thank you, ladies, for all of your support there from Rebel Nation. Love you guys to death. And once again, we have your Ole Miss Rebels checking in at 18 off of that 26-14 win in the Egg Bowl over Mississippi State. And folks, that was really a sloppy game when you think about it. Now, defensively for Ole Miss, fantastic. After giving up 14 points in the first quarter, did not surrender a single point for the rest of the game. Ole Miss, from an offensive standpoint, just really was sluggish in that ball game. Scored 9 points in the second half, really did not fully pull away from that game until the fourth quarter, but fantastic job once again by that Ole Miss defense led by defense coordinator Pete Golding. Checking in at number 17, we're going to see a little bit of a flip-flop here with South Carolina. This team has absolutely been on a roll here as of late, getting that 17-14 win over Clemson and getting that win on the road, securing their 9th win on the season. Just a fantastic job. And this team really has not lost since you have to go all the way back to October 12th when they lost in Tuscaloosa, coming off of back-to-back losses to Ole Miss and to Alabama. Yes, we'll talk about that. But since that, this team has reeled off 6 straight wins and have looked really impressive doing so. So our data is absolutely recognizing how well this team has played over the past few weeks, and they've put themselves in as good of a position as they possibly can. Now, those early losses will have to be accounted in, and we'll see where the committee has them. But right now, we have South Carolina checking in at number 17. Checking in at number 16 is the Alabama Crimson Tide, off of that 28-14 win in the Iron Bowl over Auburn. I want to talk about another sluggish performance. That's kind of what we saw for Alabama in this contest. Went into halftime with a 14-6 lead. Auburn was given every opportunity to win that game with just horrible turnovers by Jalen Milroy in that contest. But Alabama defense bowed their necks and absolutely kept Ole Miss out of the end zone. Kept Auburn out of the end zone. Finally got that touchdown in the third quarter, hit the 2-point conversion, but after that, goose egg for the rest of the game. So fantastic job by the Alabama defense. Alabama offense left a lot to be desired in that ball game. So we'll see how the committee takes that into account But right now, we have the Alabama Crimson Tide sitting at number 16 in this latest installment of our college football playoff rankings. Checking in at number 15, out of the American Conference, 10-1, the Army Black Knights, and we just talked about it. They will be playing for a conference championship coming up this weekend. But really, their path of getting into the college football playoffs is pretty much done now. As last weekend, the committee did not even have them ranked, so I don't expect Army to be ranked in this week's rankings for the committee. We still have them ranked pretty high, but when we just get down to this final 2 weeks of rankings, just don't see a pathway for Army to find their way into the college football playoffs. Checking in at number 14 and fresh off of a 49-7 win in the Territorial Cup over in-state foe Arizona, that is the Arizona State Sun Devils. And we've been talking about it. Kenny Dillingham, probably the coach of the year in that conference in the Big 12. Would not be surprised if him and Coach Prime shared that honor as far as coaches of the year in the Big 12. Think that would probably be a little bit more fitting, but I think with Arizona State finding their way into the Big 12 championship game may give Kenny Dillingham just a slight edge. They're going to be facing off against Iowa State for a berth into the college football playoffs because as one of the highest conference champions winners, they're at least guaranteed a seat into the college football playoffs. We'll see where they end up ranked, but that's where we have Arizona State right now. Checking in at 13, and we talked about it, a catastrophic loss there in the Carrier Dome by the Miami Hurricanes. Checking in at number 13, a significant fall from grace, and they are out of the college football playoffs. Don't see Miami getting in with 0 wins over any top 25 teams this year. This loss knocking them out of the knocking them out of the Atlantic Coast Conference championship game, thus knocking them out of the college football playoffs. 38-42 when they're by the Qs, and Miami got off to a hot start in the first quarter, up 14-0. Syracuse fights back, scoring 14 in the second quarter, go into halftime down 21-7, and then absolutely put on a show in the third quarter, outscoring Miami 21-7. Miami just was not able to get back control of this ball game against Syracuse, ultimately coming up with a loss. And Mario Cristobal is going to have to answer a lot of questions about some in-game decision there this weekend for his Hurricanes. Just a horrible job of coaching, and it ultimately cost Miami. We talked about it over the past month that this team absolutely have been playing with their food, and it ultimately bit them in the backside again on Saturday. Checking in at number 12, Boise State. And the Broncos, we know that they have a date in the Mountain West Championship game against UNLV. We talked about that matchup briefly, but coming off a 34-18 win there over Oregon State to close out their regular season at 11-1. Their only loss, a 3-point loss to Oregon back early on in this season. Ashton Jeanty will likely be the runner-up for the Heisman, but he's had a historical year. We haven't mentioned the name Barry Sanders as far as that record year that he had back at Oklahoma State in a couple of decades. Once again, going over 200 yards, having a touchdown on the ground. He's going to have to be fresh and ready to go against UNLV because this team, having faced him already, will know some of the things that worked well against them and ultimately what didn't work well. I think that that may be something that we'll talk about on the big show coming up. Checking in still at number 11 for us, and that is BYU. Brigham Young University out of the Big 12. Ooh, just really ran out of gas is the best way I can describe it at the end of the year. They were able to hold on and get a 30-18 win on senior day against the Houston Cougars. That game ultimately ended Colorado's chance of getting into the Big 12 championship game and did boost the next team that we're going to talk about into that Big 12 title game. So checking in at number 10, the Cyclones of Iowa State, and Iowa State off a 29-21 win at home over Kansas State in Farmageddon. And that game lived up to all of the craziness that we would expect from this matchup. Had a great breakdown on this contest for the big show, and Iowa State really got control of this game in the second quarter, coming off a 7-7 tie at the end of the first quarter. Outscored Kansas State there in that second quarter 17-7, and then basically got a field goal in safety in the fourth quarter to maintain that lead. So fantastic job there by Iowa State, beating Kansas State and earning their trip to play in the Big 12 championship game. Coming in at number 9 is America's team, the Indiana Hoosiers. And folks, after a 66-point shutout win over in-state rival, the Purdue Boilermakers, Indiana ends their regular season with an 11-1 record, and Kurt Cignetti probably did everything but lock up head coach of the year, not only in the conference, but maybe head coach of the year nationwide. Just got off to a slow start in the first quarter, 7-0, but then 21 straight points in the second quarter. Basically did everything but put this game to sleep. And got to give a tip of the cap to America's quarterback, as I like to call him, Curtis Rourke, playing his final game there in Bloomington. We know that this young man was the former MAC Player of the Year before transferring up to IU. 23 for 31, 349 yards, 6 touchdowns, no INTs. This Indiana team was going to leave no doubt to the playoff committee. I think that they just locked up their bid to make the college football playoffs with that win over Purdue and having that 11-1 record. Their only loss coming to Ohio State. We know the strength of schedule isn't great, but they have taken care of business other than that each and every week. Checking in at number 8, Rocky Top. Want to say a quick hello to my good friend Julie Balls. Her and my good friend Matlock host a fantastic show. Moving to the afternoons there on wearesportsradio.com from 4 to 6 drive time. So congratulations, guys, for the new time slot. You deserve that opportunity because you guys do a fantastic job. And Julie Balls, let's talk about your Tennessee Volunteers as they were here in my backyard against the Vanderbilt Commodores. And early on in that ball game did not look like all was well as Vandy got off to a hot start in that ball game, going up in the first quarter 17-7. Big time coaching blunder there by Vanderbilt's head coach Clark Lee, going for it on 4th down instead of pinning Tennessee deep, gave them a short field. Tennessee took advantage of that and never looked back in that ball game, reeling off, I want to say it looks like 26 consecutive points there before Vandy was able to put up any more points there late in the fourth quarter to get that score. For some who were interested, got the cover there. So congratulations to Tennessee. I think that you just locked up a bid to the college football playoffs, and I think you'll be hosting a round 1 game there in Knoxville when the playoff rankings come next Sunday are released. So 36-23 win for the Volunteers to end their 10-2 regular season, but still have plenty of work to do coming up. And speaking of my good friend Matlock, the team that he calls his side piece, the SMU Mustangs, and SMU coming off of a 38-6 win over the Cal Golden Bears. They were already in the ACC championship game. They were just waiting to see would they be playing Miami or would they be playing Clemson. So now, here's where we're going to get interesting at the end of the show coming up. Since Miami is not going to be coming into this ACC title game, and Clemson limping in off of that loss to South Carolina, high stake poker for SMU as far as getting into the playoffs. They were hoping that either Miami or Clemson would come in with one loss, and that would probably keep the ACC with 2 bids. We'll find out if the ACC is going to remain with 2 bids or are they going to slip back down to 1 bid after what we saw this weekend in conference play. Checking in at number 6 this weekend, and this team has some serious questions, and this head coach, Ryan Day, has some serious questions, and that is the Buckeyes of Ohio State. 13-10 loss at home to a 6-5 Michigan team. Folks, when we go inside of the numbers, this was maybe one of the worst game plans that we have seen from the Buckeyes in quite a few years. This team struggled on third downs, going 6 for 16 in that ball game. Once again, could not run the ball against Michigan. That's been a theme there. Going to be talking about that this week on a couple of appearances that I have. 26 rushing attempts, 77 yards, 3 yards per rushing attempt. Not good. They were outrushed in this game by almost 100 yards as Michigan once again dominated the line of scrimmage. 41 rushing attempts, 173 yards, 4.2 yards per carry. Folks, if you wonder why Ohio State continues to get their butt kicked by Michigan, it starts with the offense and defensive lines. That O-line for Ohio State is not good enough to handle Michigan's defensive front, and that Michigan O-line is better than that Ohio State defensive line. You don't have to believe what I'm telling you. The numbers that I just gave bear that out. And that loss is going to be very problematic for Ohio State, as I don't think that Ohio State is probably going to be in line to host a game in the first round for the college football playoffs. We'll get to the reason why here in just a moment. Checking in at number 5, the Penn State Nittany Lions. And thanks to that loss by Ohio State and that win by Penn State over Maryland, 44-7, Penn State now goes to the Big Ten championship game to face Oregon. And with that loss by Ohio State, and because Penn State is going to be rewarded for playing in the conference championship game as Ohio State isn't, even though Ohio State has the head-to-head win over Penn State, the committee is going to reward Penn State for getting into their conference championship game, regardless of the results on Saturday against Oregon. Checking in at number 4, folks, this is a team I've been talking about for the past few weeks. Notre Dame, off of that 49-35 win over USC, and USC was a gritty and gutty team in this matchup. But when you give up 35 points in the second half, you're probably not going to win many ball games, especially when you score 35 points total. So good job by Notre Dame not slipping on a banana peel, getting that win in Los Angeles, and basically setting themselves up to be hosting a game in the college football playoffs there in South Bend here in a few weeks when we start the opening round of the college football playoffs. Checking in at number 3 off of a 8 overtime game win over Georgia Tech, and that is the Georgia Bulldogs. And this was a game that Georgia Tech absolutely blew their opportunity to win it. They were up 17-0 going into the half, but never got control of the game. This is something that I've learned from a couple of former GMs. It's not the fact that you have to lead, but you also have to have control of the game. And the fact that Georgia Tech was not able to get up by 3 or more touchdowns early on in this ball game ultimately is what cost them that win as far as Georgia Tech goes. Carson Beck. Carson Beck continues to tease us with his talent. And when you look at his numbers, 28 for 43, 297 yards, 5 touchdowns, no INTs. You would think Carson Beck played a fantastic ball game. From a statistical standpoint, he did. But if you go back and watch that game, to say it was disjointed by Georgia would not be an understatement. But I will repeat this phrase that I repeat often. Good teams find a way to win games that they shouldn't. Bad teams find a way to lose games that they should. Credit to Kirby Smart for getting a win that he absolutely should not have gotten. And that is the mark of a guy who has been a 2-time national champion in college football. So great job there by Kirby Smart. We'll see you in Atlanta as you'll be facing off against the next team that I'm going to be talking about. And that is the Texas Longhorns. They will come in at the number 2 spot for us. And for the first time in over 13 years, they played in-state rival Texas A&M. And folks, this was maybe one of the ugliest games to watch. And Texas will finish their regular season 11-1, coming off a 17-7 win over Texas A&M. And honestly, the A&M offense did not do a single thing in this ball game. The defense scored the only touchdown really for them in this contest. And when you look at it, if Texas doesn't turn the ball over twice in this ball game, that margin is certainly bigger than 10 points. So credit for Texas to get the win. Their first year in the Southeastern Conference, they will be playing for the SEC title, and getting that win over A&M makes it all the better for them in the Lone Star State. And once again, checking in at number 1 is the Oregon Ducks. Just coming off of a complete dismantle of the Washington Huskies, 49-21. Folks, that game wasn't even that close. Oregon took the lead early in that ball game and never let their foot really off the gas. Went into halftime with a 28-14 lead and just dominated the rest of the ball game. So congratulations to head coach Dan Lanning winning his 12th game and running the table in the regular season. Still work to be done there in Indianapolis if you want that number 1 overall seed. Take care of business against Penn State. We'll be breaking that game down along with the rest of the conference championship games on the Big Show this week. And we just put it up on the screen here really quick. We'll just run through 1 through 25 really quick as a quick recap. And then we'll talk about some of the things that we saw over the weekend. Tulane checks in at number 25, followed by Colorado at 24. Checking in at number 23 is the Missouri Tigers. 22, Clemson. Memphis at 21. Louisiana Raging Cajuns at 20. UNLV at 19. Ole Miss at 18. South Carolina and Alabama at 17 and 16. Army checks in at 15. Arizona State, Miami, Boise State, and BYU rounding out 11. Coming in at number 10, Iowa State, followed by Indiana, Tennessee at 8, SMU at 7, Ohio State at 6, Penn State at number 5. Getting into the top 4, Notre Dame at 4, Georgia at 3, Texas at number 2, and the Oregon Ducks at 1. Now, let's take a look at how the bracket would look today. And this is not based on where they're ranked. It would be how they would be seeded. So if you're watching this on YouTube or Twitter, here's the bracket. In that 12-5 matchup, we have Boise State as right now projected to win the Mountain West and get that final guaranteed slot as a conference champion. They would be heading to South Bend, Indiana to face the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. The winner of that contest would go on to face on the road Arizona State. Checking in at the number 9 and 8 matchup, Ohio State, by virtue of not playing for their conference championship game, would travel down to Athens and face the Georgia Bulldogs, who would be right now projected to be the runner-up just because of the way that they're seeded. Georgia. Now, we know just a few years ago, this was a college football playoff game and came down to the wire. So that matchup with Ohio State going to Athens would be very significant consequences for Ohio State losing that game to Michigan. The winner of that matchup would head to the Pacific Northwest to face the Oregon Ducks in a very loud stadium. If it's Ohio State, it's a rematch of what we saw in the early part of the season as they had to travel to Eugene, lost that game by just a couple of points there. So they know what it feels like to play inside of that stadium, but first would have to get past the Georgia Bulldogs to do so. In the 11-6 matchup, you want to talk about for the history books, we got to go back to 1978 with what's known for Alabama as the greatest goal line stand in college football history against Penn State there in the Sugar Bowl, basically securing another national championship for head coach Paul Bear Bryant. That matchup featured two of maybe the top, at least top 20 head coaches in college football history, along with Joe Paterno. Coming up just a little bit short, this time Alabama, as the last at-large team to get into the field, as of now, would be traveling to Happy Valley to face Penn State. That winner would head to Dallas to face number 3 SMU. And then the final game in the opening round would find the Indiana Hoosiers as the 10th seed heading to Knoxville to take on the Tennessee Volunteers. Folks, I would love to set the over-under in that ball game. Ooh, you could see a lot of points scored in that contest between Indiana and Tennessee as both teams like to light up the scoreboard. The winner of that contest would face the number 2 seed for us as of today in the Texas Longhorns. Now, let's talk about who really has a chance of still making the 12-team bracket. And right now, I feel like we know which teams have an opportunity to do so. Oregon, Texas, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Georgia, Penn State, and Tennessee, I think those teams are already in. I feel strongly that Indiana is probably in. The Big 12 will get only one team in, and that's either going to be Arizona State or Iowa State. The winner of that, I think, will be the fourth seed, regardless of who it is, whether it's Arizona State or Iowa State. Now, what could improve the Big 12 conference champion to maybe be on the 3 line is a loss by SMU. I think if SMU wins the ACC, they'll be the 3 seed. But if it happens to be Clemson, Clemson would probably slide in as maybe the 12th seed, and Boise State would move to the fourth line, as I think with that loss to South Carolina, Boise State would then get a bye into the college football playoffs that opening week. Now, who's impacted the most by the ACC title game? I think it's Alabama. Alabama is going to be the biggest SMU fan this weekend coming up. Because right now, as it sits, they are the last team in. We'll talk about here in just a moment in some of the questions that we got as far as this week's top 25. And let's go ahead and get to that. All right, so the number one question we got was, why is Ole Miss ranked behind both Alabama and South Carolina, considering the fact that Ole Miss beat South Carolina on the road? And I'm pulling up that score here in just a moment. Okay, so back on October 5th, Ole Miss went to Columbia and won 27-3. So convincing win there by Ole Miss. Here's the problem for Ole Miss. Their strength of schedule out of Alabama and Ole Miss is the weakest as far as those two teams go. While they're behind South Carolina just beat a team that's going to be playing for their conference championship. And I think that is something that our numbers definitely reflect. So the head-to-head matters, but where these teams are power ranked, it is just a slight difference. And as I look here on our data, it looks like Ole Miss is behind South Carolina by 1 point. So Ole Miss has a 7.3, South Carolina at 8.3, and for conversation's sake, Alabama sits at 10.1. So it's not a popularity contest, folks, for us. Now, can't speak for the committee, but for us, it's strictly looking at the data. It's who did you play, not just in conference, but out of conference as well. And then what were the results of that ball game? Question number 2, who was the biggest beneficiary this week and who was hurt the most? Right now, I would say the biggest beneficiary was the Big 12, knowing that their conference champion would not be left out thanks to that Tulane loss to Memphis at home. And then the other biggest winner would have to be the Alabama Crimson Tide, even though they looked absolutely sluggish on the offensive side of the ball with their quarterback turning the ball over, I think, 3 times, all by fumbles, I think. But with what happened to Clemson, who sat ahead of them last week, losing, Miami, who sat ahead of them, also losing, that is only going to help Alabama move up in the committee's rankings on Tuesday night. Who was hurt the most? The Atlantic Coast Conference. They are no longer basically a lock to get two teams in. I think that's the biggest loser. The other biggest loser has to be Ohio State, not just losing to Michigan once again, but not playing in the Big Ten championship game is probably going to knock them out of hosting an opening round contest, regardless of how this weekend possibly plays out. I think Ohio State is probably the other biggest loser. You can also throw Miami in as well as the biggest loser, as they are completely out of the playoffs with no path to get back in. I think they're going to have the biggest drop here coming up. How many teams still have a chance to make the playoffs that aren't currently in? As far as the way that we have it projected, really it comes down to Clemson, Iowa State, and UNLV. And the only way those three teams get in is they win their conference championship game. UNLV would have to knock off Boise State to get in as the Mountain West champion. Clemson would have to knock off SMU to get in as the ACC champion. And Iowa State would have to knock off Arizona State to get in as the Big 12 champion. So we're basically down to 15 teams and 12 spots. And like I said, I feel like we're pretty much locked and loaded with, I want to say, at least 8 or 9 of those, with those teams being Oregon, Texas, Notre Dame, Penn State, Tennessee, Georgia, Ohio State, and Indiana. All of those teams, I think, are firmly already in the college football playoffs. The other 3 spots pretty much are up for grabs based on the results coming up on championship weekend. Does a win by Clemson, and this comes in from my good friend Matlock, does a win by Clemson knock Alabama out of the playoffs? Great question, Matt, and I know you're going to be talking about that on your show along with Julie Valves. Let me give you the answer right now based on what I saw from the committee last weekend. And if we look at the committee's rankings, not going to put these up on the screen, but I'm just going to run through, let's see, the top. Let's stop at the top, 16. So let's go from 16 down, 16 to 1. So last week for the committee, South Carolina was 16, followed by Ole Miss at 15, and Alabama at 13. So the committee has already ranked those 3 in that order from last week. Then Clemson was at 12, Boise State was at 11, Indiana was at 10. Now, SMU was at 9, Tennessee was at 8, Georgia at 7, Miami was at 6, Notre Dame was at 5, Penn State was at 4, Texas was at 3, Ohio State was at 2, and Oregon at 1. Based on that, Matlock, I'm looking at if SMU loses to Clemson, does the committee reward SMU and give them that final spot at number 11 over Alabama? I think that's going to be a tough decision for the committee, but from what Ward Manuel, the committee chairperson, told us about how they're going to lean towards teams that play in their conference championship game versus teams that don't, I think you may be on to something. I think that a Clemson win over SMU knocks Alabama out, and SMU goes in at the 11th spot. What was my biggest surprise out of this weekend's rankings? Honestly, I don't have anything that really surprised me as far as the rankings go. As I mentioned, only 3 games had playoff implications that were affected this weekend by teams losing. Ohio State's stunning loss to Michigan at home again. Memphis beating Tulane, and Syracuse upset win over Miami. So I think it plays out. The ACC could possibly still get 2 teams in. I think it's going to depend on how that game plays out. If SMU loses that game to Clemson by 7 or less, I think SMU gets the 11th spot. That's the last at-large team to get in. I think if it's anything more than double digits, 13 or more, SMU could find themselves on the outside looking in Alabama in the college football playoffs. All right, something that is new this week that I haven't done before we close out the show. I'm going to try to project how the committee is going to set the top 12 teams this week. Coming in at number 12 will be Boise State. Coming in at number 11, and I may have these flip-flops, is Alabama. I think I'm going to do an audible here. I'm going to say Alabama at 12, Boise State at 11. Indiana will probably check in at number 10. We can see those 3 teams in that order or a combination, but right now we're going to project it that way. I think Arizona State checks in at number 9. Ohio State slips all the way from number 2 down to number 8. Tennessee at number 7. We're going to slide SMU at number 6. Georgia at number 5, followed by Notre Dame at number 4, Penn State at number 3, Texas at number 2, and Oregon at number 1. Like I said, I'm going to project the bottom a little bit differently than what I have on the graphic. I think after looking at it, once again, I think I'm going to have Alabama at 12. I'm going to have Indiana at 11. So we're going to change this up from what you're seeing on the screen if you're watching this on YouTube or Twitter. Okay, so let's go back through it. Alabama checks in at number 12, followed by Indiana at number 11. Boise State will check in at number 10, followed by Arizona State at 9. I think Ohio State does make the drop down to 8. I think Tennessee is going to be ahead of Ohio State, but I could see those 2 flip-flop. So I would not be surprised if Ohio State was at 7 and Tennessee was at 8. But right now, we're going to go with Ohio State because they lost as a big favorite at home to Michigan. I think the committee is going to make them pay a price for that. SMU, by virtue of playing for their conference championship game, I'm going to put them at the number 6 spot. Georgia, we're going to put at the number 5 spot. Notre Dame is sitting in the catbird seat at the number 4 spot. Penn State, we're going to have them at the 3 spot. Texas at 2. And, of course, Oregon at the number 1 spot. So making a change right there on the fly, but I think that's how it's going to play out. So once again, Oregon at 1, Texas at 2, Penn State at number 3, Notre Dame at 4, the Georgia Bulldogs at 5, SMU at 6, followed by Tennessee at 7, Ohio State at 8. We're going to put Arizona State at 9. I'm going to put Boise State at 10, Indiana at 11, and Alabama at 12. Want to say thank you for spending almost this hour with us here at the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network, as this has been a little bit of a change for us this year, trying to project not only our college football playoff rankings, but now as we get down to the end of the show with the committee, thinking how they're going to stack up these 12 teams as far as the playoff rankings go. So we just ran through it and want to wish all of you a happy rest of your Sunday afternoon or whenever you're listening to this podcast or watching it on YouTube. On behalf of my fantastic team, who will be back off of their Thanksgiving break. Uh, Jennifer, who does a great job with the intro promo, getting you ready to be all aboard the big show or the college football playoff rankings. Our talented and lovely co-hosts, Jessica and Summer, who will be back this week as we got a big show, literally and figuratively, to break down these conference championship games. Our senior handicapping analyst, Billy. Of course, this is Kenneth, senior analyst for the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network. And right before we get out of here, let's give you the rundown for championship week as far as these 9 major conference championship games will be coming up later this week. On Friday night at 7 p.m., the UNLV Running Rebels will look to knock off the Boise State there on the Smurf turf, as the Broncos of Boise State will host UNLV. Also on Friday night, in the American Athletic Conference, Tulane will do battle with the Army Black Knights to see who wins that conference championship game. And then the big slate on Saturday, starting at 3 p.m., the Georgia Bulldogs and the Texas Longhorns rematch, this time in Atlanta, for the biggest prize in this conference, and that is the SEC Conference Championship, and likely the team that will be the number 2 overall seed in the college football playoffs. Coming up also on Saturday, this will get us kicked off on Saturday morning as the Big 12 championship game there from Dallas. The Iowa State Cyclones will face the Arizona State Sun Devils. That game set to kick off 11 a.m. on Saturday. Coming in prime time, we have 2 showcase showdowns. And I'm sorry, I left out one game on Friday. Conference USA, Western Kentucky. This game may be big for Alabama as they squared off against Western Kentucky back early on in the season. Will take on Jacksonville State for the Conference USA championship game. That game is Friday at 6 p.m. Back to our Saturday slate, also at 11 a.m., the MAC championship game as the Ohio Bobcats will face the Redhawks of Miami of Ohio. At 6:30 p.m., the Sun Belt championship game, Marshall Thundering Herd take on the Raging Cajuns of Louisiana. Like I said, that game is at 6:30 p.m. Then in prime time, we have the Penn State Nittany Lions versus the Oregon Ducks for the Big Ten championship game. I think the winner of this game will be the number 1 overall seed for the College Football Playoff Committee. And then finally, in Charlotte, the Atlantic Coast Conference, the Clemson Tigers will square off against the SMU Mustangs. Possibly winner take all. We'll see if SMU loses that game. Do they bump out Alabama coming up this week? We're going to attempt to do a live stream on Sunday right after the committee rankings come out. So stay tuned and give us a follow on Twitter at CrunchTime VIP for more details on that. Once again, thank you for spending the last hour with us as we wrap up here on this show. Want to say thank you to all the college football fans for supporting us this season. As Summer said last week, it has been a daunting task covering all 134 teams this year, but I think we did a fantastic job. So on behalf of my fantastic team, thank you for all your support. Enjoy the rest of your NFL Sunday, and we'll see you back on the big show later on this